To say it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here. If you haven't been to IPI before, you are very welcome here.
Welcome to this conversation, an informal and unassuming conversation. And the theme is of leadership and courage in international affairs. How can the international system be made more inclusive, transparent, and responsive? How can UN member states and civil society better partner to be courageous despite threats and intimidation in today's world? The defunct League of Nations thought it was indispensable. What about the UN as we know it? How to implement calls for transformation? A few examples that we've heard: decolonizing humanitarianism and reimagining multilateralism to better reflect the realities and voices of those most affected by conflict and humanitarian crises. And then there was something about taking liberties with Nietzsche. Diplomacy is dead, ? And can leadership without being ethical still be called leadership? Particularly thankful to the co-host, ITUMΟ Institute, new think tank based in Benin and headed by Dr. Moudjib, Jenna.
But is the world ready for that shift of power? Is this the cause for the tension which is, of course, rising across the world? I would be tempted to say, to some extent, yes, because we are witnessing the crumbling of a system which has served humanity for the past 80 years, but put it in the wider picture of where civilizations stand. If you look at China, for example, 5,000 years, India and all these regions, they have, of course, they are what I call civilization state. So we see that maybe it has been an experiment with how we see the world. So now we are at this moment where the multilateral system, as we have known it, is becoming, I would not say fast irrelevant, but we have to salvage whatever has been working for humanity and see how we can use the current scenario to see a more balanced world, and of course where we'll see more inclusion, because so far many parts of the world have been excluded from the rising tide of prosperity, and here I can't not mention my own continent, Africa, and Africa is a rising continent demographically, at least. And if we are to look at what is going on right now with the tension across Western Europe, we find that immigration is becoming a very big issue. But then again, if you look at the tendency for the next 50 years, we find that many parts of Western Europe, of course, is going to go down demographically. And when you have a giant in terms of neighborhood of Africa, it makes you wonder whether the shift has to be much more investment to keep people where they are, as opposed to let the status quo reign. And you find, of course, migration, which is going to be a divisive feature, which shouldn't be, because at the end of the day, the history of humanity has been defined by immigration. And we have to look at ways where there is much better distribution of wealth, much better distribution of opportunities. We see that some countries are getting it right. We know geopolitics as it is. We know that the geopolitical plates are shifting very fast. Where will this leave us in terms of peace, especially within the realm of a changing climate? And some people will not agree that climate is an issue, but for me, for us, living in the global south, living in an island, we live it every day. Every year we see, of course, more violent cyclone, we see drought, we see all this. So to us, it's beyond symptomatic. It's a reality that we have to live with. So all these issues combined together becomes a threat to global peace. Because again, if people cannot feed themselves, cannot clothe themselves, cannot see a future where they feel that hope is defeated, is not there, this, of course, will be another crisis and an issue for long-lasting peace.
The guiding questions remind us that the international system, as it stands, is not a neutral machine, but a human creation. As a human creation, it is marked by exclusions, by emotions, by imbalance of power, and this is okay, because this is what any human creation is supposed to be on three aspects. First of all, inclusivity and transparency, courage and partnership, and then leadership and ethics. So are we truly ready to go beyond symbolic participation and transfer real decision-making power to those most affected by conflict and humanitarian crisis? Because the Security Council has not been created to represent the world. The Security Council is designed to manage the balance of power in this forever troubled world. Maybe courage really here resides not in grand gestures, but in persistence, continuing to speak out, to denounce, or even to speak low, even to speak behind the scene, to denounce, to resist, even as when and as the big powers prefer silence. I personally believe strongly that the United Nations is indispensable. The flaws and the mistakes are not due to the concepts and ideals, but mostly to the betrayals of its most powerful member states. Let's not forget, in 2024, the Security Council met over 300 times.
We need the United Nations. I think this is it's very central. I think there's a common ground everywhere that we need a strong institution. But I think, as we have said, it had been created in 1945, and many of the countries who are now members didn't even exist at the time. So that's one thing that we have to. And also, again, I am not going to paddle along the wire. I'll just say what I say. Many of the institutions that have been created precisely out, be it in Bretton Woods, be it after, unfortunately, they don't work for the rest of the world. I could name so many. I think you know which institution we're talking about, but they don't address the issue. But I think one of the fundamental flaws for one of the we don't have peace, I think, is the veto power at the United Nations Security Council. If we had an institution where no country had veto power, we would have resolved many of the issues which are, of course, dragging the lack of peace that we're seeing in many parts of the world. So the first thing would be no veto power. More representation. The UN at the moment, the Security Council, does not represent the world. I am of the opinion that we need a strong UN where the leadership is strong, of course, driven by the membership but remove the veto power, because I feel that the world is bigger than five.
And today I think we are in the entire human civilization in terms of the system of multilateralism, cooperation, is under severe attack by the believers and followers of what we call in international relation the right wing or ideology of power paradigm politics. This ideology feeds into normalization of violence, atrocities, genocide action. As we've seen now in Gaza for the past 2 years, we are watching live streaming a genocide, and government took them 2 years just to say, okay, this need to stop. Not even all governments, and that's amazing that we can be broadcasting this in the 21st century, and people go about their life, normally, whether it is Palestine, whether it is Sudan or the DRC or Yemen or Ukraine, and you name it. There are so many conflicts around this world being televised, being broadcasted, and the states actor continue their days and also trying to convince their people that this is normal. Despite all of its limitation and weakness, the United Nations system is one of the last international relation fronts that is fighting to uphold peace, diplomacy, and nonviolence in the world. That's why I think it being attacked and undermined by forces or actors who promote supranationalist agenda. And I think Palestine is an excellent example. When you from 1988 there are 130 countries who recognize Palestine, and now since 1988 until today we had another 11 countries, and now we're all celebrating France and Britain and Spain moving as European Northern Hemisphere countries, moving with something that countries in the South saw as a justice to do in 1988. Even in peace work, we are a principle on the notion of cumulative action. Every voice count, every action counts. So challenging the narrative and discourse, as Moudjib mentioned, to speak up against the normalization of violence in your neighborhood, in your organization, in your family. We need that small and big voice to be said. But concretely, we learn, and I'll stop there, we learn, Bruno and other, that from the solidarity group in Palestine for the past 2 years, we have number of lessons. Stand up and speak up against oppression around you in any way you can. Endorse and support solidarity action that fight injustice elsewhere, not only in your backyard or in your neighborhood, but with other people. That stand is very important. So look for things that can inspire you and give you hope, because it's very easily to draw back and become helpless and hopeless in front of those big guns and big corporation and big forces that are trying to demoralize us and tell us that it's not going to work and you don't have enough power. So the best thing you could do as an organization, institution, individual, is to find the cause and to join a movement.
You know, there are two elephants in the room. One elephant in the room is the need for strong institutions, which outlast electoral cycles. And this is something which is, of course, eroding very, very fast. And this is what we have to build on, because we're not going to be here forever, but we have to leave behind something much stronger by the time we leave our space. The other thing, that the other elephant in the room, is we are living in the era of digitization. And the tools of technology, and especially with communication, is a very powerful tool which can go either way. So it can be a weapon to destroy, but it can be also a tool to educate, and precisely to address what you have just said, Professor, is how to reach to the young people. And how do you become independent? How do you become strong? How do you actually drive your own narrative if you don't have the means to actually deliver on what you're trying to do? So again, these are fundamental questions that we need to ask. Who owns our institution? Who owns our narrative? Who's paying?
There is an increasing disengagement of institutions, authorities, political actors from human rights. What we are facing today is the tendency of state actors to demonstrate don't care attitude towards human rights. Authorities don't seem to bother reacting, responding to human rights concerns, engaging with civil society. A source of concern is the rising trend of evoking national security considerations to justify human rights restrictions. Recent migration reforms on European level even introduced the idea that unaccompanied children, as one of the most vulnerable groups, under certain circumstances, could be considered a security threat. Without enforceability, accountability, and binding material consequences, states only pay lip service to human rights. It is the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, of course, and indeed, it is a crossroad for the international system. Leadership is not about making people feel small or oppressing them. Leadership is about empowering people. And without strong human rights, people cannot be empowered.
We have all faced repression. We've all faced hostility this year. These pressures are unfortunately very much part of our everyday, but the funding cuts that we're all facing this year have pushed a lot of us to ask, what is it that really needs to survive? Is it our entities, our brands, our organizations, or the fragile ecosystem of support that so many people, so many communities, when an ecosystem is stressed, its resilience lies not in the strength of any single entity, any single agency, any single organization, but in the connections between them. Too often, our sector behaves as if survival is a competition. Agencies, entities enter contingency mode. They hoard their resources, they close programs, they lay off staff, they retreat, they protect their territory. But ecosystems don't survive this way. Ecosystems survive by adapting by focusing on the people, by focusing on shared vulnerability. When one species is destabilized, the whole system is weakened. The humanitarian ecosystem is no different. When one organization, when one service, when one agency, when one advocacy group suffers, the entire group is eroded. Communities lose trust, and the people who ultimately experience that loss are the people we are here to serve. It's communities. The communities that have been discussed today, Palestine, Sudan, Myanmar as well. These are communities that practice this kind of courage. Every single one of these communities would give all of their support to the survival of each other, because each of these communities cares and supports about the mutual survival of each other member. They know that survival in the face of external threats is never individual. And the question is whether institutions and international agencies and civil society can learn that same lesson.
And the justice and link it with a weak institution, sorry to say it like this, when you see that even the Secretary General of the United Nations is not allowed to visit a country or a place because Israel prevent him to do so, or when you see that the general prosecutor of ICC also have a bigger trouble to visit Gaza, so we have a problem. Talking about UNRWA, the same. We decided just last week to create a global network for lawyers for Palestine. It's a sort of international alliance of legal, professional, and human rights defenders committed to pursuing justice for the Palestinian people. First one is ending the genocide and apartheid against the Palestinian people. This is the first one. The second one is pursuing accountability before the national, the regional, and the international courts. Even there is trouble and there are problems with that, but we have to do it. It's a sort of mapping and sharing legal tools, and the president is supporting initiatives of resistance and solidarity, such as humanitarian flotilla. Today we're talking about this flotilla, about this more than 50 boats from 40 or 45 nationality. Who are trying to go there. Next week there are another 10 boats, yes. And in 6 weeks another boats from Switzerland again.
You mentioned the flotilla and the legal aid, and it seems overnight there's also some Spain and Italy giving some assistance through extra Navy vessels accompanying them. But I wanted to mention, because I think you're a humble person, you are the one who started the first boats of the flotilla many, many years ago, but you're quiet about it. But so see how it is today. So you are the one who made it happen, and I thank you for that.
Leadership, UN leadership, how to transform the UN. I am really seized by the issue of decolonization, and not only decolonizing of humanitarian, which I appreciate, or human rights, but also decolonizing development, decolonizing peace building, decolonizing how we handle political affairs, and mostly decolonizing our minds and our mindsets. And I want to point out 2 or 3 things that I think is critical for the UN to change itself, and wider. The UN is internally and externally. 3 things this says. Practices in the aid system mirror colonial structures in many ways. Direction of flow of funding. Practices, as if the global north always knows better. Staffing, how internationals are in decision making and locals are implementers. Even language like capacity building, which implies local people don't have capacity. And the white savior mentality, etc., which many of us suffer from. Secondly, structural racism is so deeply embedded in the culture and practices of development. How local staff in the UN, as you know, are paid less. How internationals come in and often are senior and supervising people who have much more experience. Program and research design are rooted in Western values and knowledge systems, meaning that programs inadvertently create a standard based on the West that communities of the global South are required to meet, and local knowledge is by default devalued.
I want to add a layer, what we've lived through in Gaza in particular, when I identified rather openly how many of our own colleagues, Palestinians, so I think we are about 380 local staff, UN officials, killed in Gaza. But I don't hear the voices of us colleagues about them. They happen to be brown, like me. I'm touching on your point. And they happen to be local staff. Can you imagine if a member state came here, you and New York, and killed 1%, killed 4, let's say Caucasian Americans, or in Geneva? I don't think we would be that quiet.
You know, I think for many folks, especially our partners from Global South, and particularly on the African continent, as was said earlier, any conversation on UN reform feels very hollow without also talking about council reform, because many of the things that are broken about the system have at least one thread that comes back to the Security Council. And so if you're not going to deal with that, I'm not very optimistic about the veto issue. I had a professor during my PhD where I was working on UN things, and she came back to me and she said, you know, you always write about the veto as if it was a flaw in the design of the UN system. And she said the veto was a necessary ingredient in creating the UN. And if it had not been put there, the UN would not exist. Is that we have not found a mechanism to make member states' behavior more costly. And that is a big issue. So
I wanted to have Haneen address us. Who is Haneen? I'm going to hold the painting in front of me. Hopefully the camera picks it up. Haneen is our colleague. I tried to reach her. We are not daily, but I'm in touch with her. She's a colleague who, when I visited Gaza, something happened. She's very shy. She did a painting of me kneeling in Gaza, holding oranges, and we don't know why she did that. That was in, I think, 2022, somewhere around there. And today, to me, she would have been one of the most important speakers to tell us how things going. And then when I started, like Anwar said, a campaign for human rights, for accountability, for justice, I use Haneen's painting. I'm trying to hone down on my one friend, Haneen, because she's 7th month pregnant, she's alive, not in a good health state, and we are trying to get her out of Gaza. And whomever has more contacts than I do, and people are getting out, it is possible under humanitarian circumstances, it's tough. And a few times when I don't hear from her for a few days, I'm worried. And right now I don't know. And she's moving around. And as you know, in Gaza, they've had to move north, south, and all over the place. And it's very, very dangerous on Gaza. Another former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Ms. Navi Pillay, recently was part of this independent commission. And they just said again that what is going on in the Palestine occupied territories is genocide. I was not shy to use the word genocide. And I also had the International Court of Justice, who last year talked about plausible genocide. But then today's talk is about courage and leadership. But I still see so many of my colleagues in different spheres, for whatever reason, are being quiet and don't want to use that word. I'm not sure what it takes. Second, I'm also from Mauritius. I have double nationality, US and Mauritius. And I want to say thank you to the government of Mauritius, because very recently, in two separate press conferences, I heard our Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Paul Béranger, and more recently in another press conference, Prime Minister Navin Ramgoolam, who also denounced the unacceptable behavior of the State of Israel over the State of Palestine. Of course, we are saddened by the killing of babies, boys and girls in many conflicts across the globe. But I thought, like a few of you mentioned, we are in very dangerous times where we are seeing live. We have the excuse, I think, for the Holocaust, what was unacceptable done to the Jewish people, because people said, oh, we did not know. But now I think it's a bit difficult to say that you don't know with the age of, even yesterday I saw some live pictures of the global Sumud flotilla where you saw some of the attacks of the drones.
As you say, it is still work in progress. It will be work in progress for a very long time, because the various actors who are involved in this, they are not keen to play ball. So we just have to keep on the conversation and hope that whatever action we do, we add to the advancement for a better world. That's all we can say. And we, of course, have a special prayer for all the people who are suffering, be it through genocide, be it through war. And here, of course, we've mentioned Gaza. We know in the same things happen in Ukraine, in Sudan, and all the places where conflicts are happening and where we should be able to get institutions to bring them to bear to make sure that peace prevails. Thank you.
Merci, Excellence. Thank you, everybody online.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you for your time and thank you for participating. Bye-bye.
Thank you.